The metal walls of the ship hummed with an eerie frequency that made the bones vibrate. Riley Thompson jolted awake, her eyes snapping open to the sound of laughter. Not the kind of laughter that made you smile. This was different. Cruel. The kind that came from beings who found joy in the suffering of others. She was 11 years old, lying on a cold floor in some kind of holding cell. Every part of her body hurt. Her left arm was wrapped in bandages that had turned yellowish-brown from dried blood. 3 weeks. That's how long she'd been here since the Xylothians attacked her home colony on Kepler Station. 3 weeks of watching them herd people like animals, watching them sort through humans like they were picking through garbage. The Xylothians weren't what the old stories had promised aliens would be like. They weren't curious or peaceful or interested in learning. They were tall creatures made of something that looked like crystallized glass, and their bodies caught light in ways that should have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. Their eyes had no pupils, just solid black depths that reflected nothing back. When they talked, their voices sounded like breaking ice mixed with static electricity. Riley remembered the moment they declared humans primitive vermin. She was in the processing chamber with about 50 other colonists when one of the Xylothian commanders had made that announcement. The way the aliens had laughed. That sound had stuck with her, playing on repeat in her mind during the long, lonely nights. The footsteps started before the door opened. Heavy. Deliberate. 2 of the crystalline beings entered, their forms casting strange shadows on the metal walls. Riley pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing. The pain in her arm shot through her entire body like lightning. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. One of them pointed at her with a limb that ended in something between fingers and claws. The young one, it said in that horrible voice. The commander has chosen well for today's ceremony. Ceremony. The word sent ice through Riley's veins. They didn't ask her to walk. They simply grabbed her, one on each side, and lifted her off the ground. Her feet dangled uselessly as they carried her through corridor after corridor. She recognized some of these passages. She'd been dragged through them before, forced to watch other colonists being taken away. She never saw any of them come back. As they walked, Riley tried to count the turns, tried to memorize the route, tried to do anything that might help her mind escape what was happening. But it was useless. These beings had technology she couldn't even comprehend. There was no escape. Not for a hurt kid on a ship full of monsters. The chasm chamber was vast. That's what shocked her first. The walls opened up so suddenly that her breath caught. The space was huge, like being inside a cathedral made of metal and shadow. The air felt different here, colder, thicker, like it was pressing down on her chest. And the smell. It was acrid and wrong, like burning plastic mixed with something organic and ancient. She could see the bottom of the chasm if she looked down. She didn't want to look down. But she did anyway because humans are curious even when they're terrified. It was dark down there. Not regular dark. It was the kind of darkness that seemed to move and breathe on its own. The Xylothians started laughing. All around her, more of their kind emerged from the shadows. 10, 15, maybe more. Their laughter sounded like breaking glass and wind whistling through dead things. Riley's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. Primitive, one of them hissed, leaning close to her face. Soft. Breakable. Perfect. Riley didn't understand what they meant by perfect, and she didn't want to find out. One of them stepped forward, the one who had been pointing at her before. It raised its crystalline arm, and for just a second, Riley saw her reflection in its surface. She looked so small. So fragile. So far from her mom and her home and everything she'd ever known. She opened her mouth to say something, anything. But no words came out. What would she even say to creatures like this? How do you reason with something that sees you as less than human? Less than alive? The Xylothians' laughter grew louder, crueler. Its companions joined in, a chorus of mockery that surrounded her like walls closing in. She could feel their contempt, feel how little she meant to them. She was nothing to them. Less than nothing. And then the crystalline hands released her. She fell into the darkness, screaming. The impact stole Riley's breath away. Her body crashed against stone and pain erupted everywhere at once. Her already broken arm took the brunt of it and she felt something tear inside. She wanted to scream, but her lungs wouldn't work. All she could do was lie there on the cold floor, gasping like a fish pulled from water, wondering if this was what dying felt like. The darkness around her was absolute. Thicker than anything she'd ever experienced. Even with her eyes wide open, she couldn't see anything. Just black. Endless black. She could hear the echo of her own breathing bouncing off stone walls, and that was the only proof she wasn't completely alone in the void. Then her eyes started to adjust. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Shadows became walls. The walls became a chamber. And then she saw it. She saw him. The dragon was so massive that her mind couldn't quite process the size. It wasn't like seeing something big in a picture or a video. It was real, and it was right there, and it was so huge that it made everything else seem small and insignificant. The creature's body sprawled across the chamber floor like a mountain made of flesh and scales. Midnight blue scales covered every inch of its form, catching what little light existed in that place and reflecting it back like fragments of starlight. One wing was extended along the stone floor. The other hung awkwardly, clearly damaged. The bones beneath the skin were visible in places where the scales had torn away, and Riley could see old scars crisscrossing the delicate membrane. This creature was hurt. Badly hurt. Riley's fear should have doubled. Should have tripled. She was alone in a dark chamber with something that could crush her with one movement. Something with teeth and claws and enough strength to snap her body like a twig. But instead she felt something else. Something unexpected. The dragon's eyes opened. They were enormous, each one bigger than her head, and they were the oldest things she'd ever seen. Not old like a grandparent is old. Old like mountains are old. Old like the earth itself. Those ancient eyes looked down at her, and Riley saw intelligence there. Real, thinking, feeling intelligence. And beneath that she saw something else. She saw pain. She saw loneliness so deep that it made her own fear seem small. The dragon's head moved slowly toward her. Riley's survival instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to run. The chamber was enclosed. The exit was impossibly high up. She was trapped with this creature and it was moving closer. But it didn't attack. Instead, one of its massive clawed hands, gently, so gently that it barely made a sound, scooped her up. Riley felt herself being lifted and pressed against the creature's warm body. The dragon's scales were smooth in some places and rough in others, and they radiated heat like a furnace. The dragon wrapped itself around her. One massive wing came down like a tent, sheltering her completely. It was like being inside a fortress made of muscle and bone and ancient power. Riley could feel the dragon's heartbeat through the scales, a slow, deep rhythm that matched her own panicked breathing. And then she heard it. A sound from above. High-pitched. Mechanical. The Xylothian scanners. They were looking for her. Looking to confirm that she was dead. Riley held her breath. Her entire body went rigid. She could feel the dragon's muscles tense too, as if the creature understood exactly what that sound meant and what was at stake. The light from the scanners filtered through the gaps in the dragon's wings, casting strange patterns across the stone. Riley watched, barely breathing, as the beams moved back and forth across the chamber. Searching. Always searching. The dragon didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't give any sign that a human girl was hidden beneath its scales. The scanning went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally the sound faded. The light disappeared. The scanners moved on to search elsewhere. When the silence returned, Riley felt the dragon slowly relax. Its wings shifted slightly, creating just enough space for her to breathe a little easier. She looked up at the creature's massive face, at those ancient eyes that were now looking directly at her. In that moment, Riley understood something that the Xylothians could never understand. This dragon wasn't a monster. It wasn't some primitive beast. It was a being. A conscious, thinking, feeling being that had just made a choice. It had chosen to protect her. It had chosen to keep her alive. And as Riley lay there against the dragon's warm body, hidden from the scanners and the Xylothians and everything that wanted to hurt them, she realized something else. She wasn't the only prisoner here. This magnificent creature had been trapped in this chamber for far longer than she could imagine. Alone. Wounded. Forgotten. The dragon had recognized something in her. A fellow prisoner. A fellow survivor. And that recognition changed everything. Time became meaningless in the darkness of the chasm. Riley couldn't tell if days were passing or weeks. There was no sunlight, no clock, no way to measure the hours except by her own hunger and exhaustion. But she didn't think about that much anymore. She was too busy surviving. The dragon had shown her a passage on the first day, a narrow tunnel that led to what looked like an old storage chamber. The walls were covered in dust so thick it looked like gray snow. Metal containers lined the shelves, most of them corroded beyond recognition. But some were still sealed, still intact. Riley found bandages in one. Medical supplies in another. Ancient but better than nothing. She also found water. A slow drip from a crack in the ceiling had collected in a stone basin over what must have been years. It wasn't clean but it was wet and that was enough. The first time Riley approached the dragon's broken wing, she was terrified. The creature was so large and her hands were so small. What if she hurt it? What if the dragon thought she was attacking and crushed her without meaning to? But the dragon seemed to understand what she was trying to do. It stayed perfectly still, its massive body relaxed, watching her with those ancient eyes. Okay, Riley whispered to herself more than to the dragon. You're a doctor. Well, you want to be a doctor. So act like one. She'd watched her mom work in the colony's medical center enough times to know the basics. Clean the wound. Stop the infection. Support the injury while it healed. The dragon's wing was a mess, torn muscle, broken bone, and scales that had begun to peel away from infection. She worked carefully, using strips of cloth to gently clean away the worst of the damage. The dragon never flinched. Never pulled away. It just watched her with what Riley could have sworn was gratitude. As she worked, Riley talked. At first, she did it just to fill the silence. The silence in the chasm was so complete that it felt like a living thing, pressing down on her, trying to suffocate her. Talking helped. Talking made her feel less alone. My mom wanted me to be a teacher, she said, wrapping a fresh bandage around the dragon's wing. But I wanted something more. I wanted to help people. To really help them, you know? I wanted to be a doctor like she wanted to be when she was my age. She had to give it up when she got pregnant with me. The dragon made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite anything Riley had heard before. It was deep and resonant, and it seemed to vibrate through her entire body. I know, Riley said as if the dragon had actually spoken. I know life doesn't always work out the way you plan. But I'm going to be different. If I get out of here, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to help people who nobody else wants to help. People like us. Broken people. Forgotten people. She told the dragon about Earth. About the forests and oceans. About her neighborhood where kids played in the streets without being afraid. About her best friend Marcus who could make her laugh even when everything was terrible. About her dad's terrible cooking and her mom's laugh and the way the sun felt on her skin during summer. The more she talked, the more the dragon responded. It wasn't words, she didn't have the ability to speak in any language the dragon would understand. But there were sounds. Low rumbles that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. And there were lights. Bioluminescent patterns that rippled across the dragon's scales like water under moonlight. Soft blues and silvers and greens that painted the darkness with something almost beautiful. One night, or what Riley thought of as night, though there was no real difference between day and night in the chasm, the dragon did something new. It lowered its massive head down to where Riley was sitting and made a sound she'd never heard before. It was almost like a question. Or maybe a memory trying to find words. And then Riley understood. It wasn't like someone explaining something to her. It was more like the knowledge just appeared in her mind. The dragon was showing her things. Flashes of images that weren't quite like human memories. They were older. Stranger. Like watching history through someone else's dreams. She saw civilizations rising and falling. She saw beings that looked nothing like humans being captured and enslaved. She saw the Xylothians spreading across worlds, always conquering, always taking, always destroying anything that stood in their way. And she saw the dragon, alone, always alone, trapped in this chamber for thousands of years while empires rose and fell above her head. The loneliness in those memories was so profound that Riley felt tears streaming down her face. Oh my God, she whispered. How long? How long have you been alone? The dragon didn't answer with words. It answered by placing its enormous head down beside her and making that strange rumbling sound again. But this time it was different. There was something softer in it. Something that sounded almost like relief. Riley reached out with her small hand and placed it on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm beneath her palm. She could feel the creature's heartbeat, steady and slow and alive. You're not alone anymore, Riley said, and she meant every word. I'm here. I'm not leaving. I don't care what happens. We're together now. You and me. We're a team. The dragon's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. And for the first time in thousands of years, the creature's ancient face showed something that Riley recognized. The footsteps came without warning. Heavy. Deliberate. The sound echoed through the chasm like a death knell. Riley's heart jumped into her throat. The Xylothians were coming. They were coming to confirm what they already believed, that the human girl was dead, consumed by the dragon, gone forever. She looked up at the dragon's face. The creature's ancient eyes were open, watching the darkness above where the sounds were coming from. Riley could feel the tension in the dragon's body. Fear maybe. Or something else. Something like determination. We're ready, Riley whispered, more to herself than to the dragon. Over the past weeks, or had it been months? Time still blurred together. She'd been working on something. Something that had started as a desperate idea born from boredom and fear and the need to do something other than just wait to die. In the old storage chamber, she'd found more than just medical supplies. She'd found pieces of technology. Broken comm units. Old circuit boards. Fragments of things that the Xylothians had probably abandoned and forgotten about. Riley had always been good with her hands. Her dad had taught her that back on the colony. How to take things apart. How to see how they worked. How to put them back together in new ways. It was a skill that had seemed useless in the real world, but down here in the darkness, it had become everything. She'd managed to rebuild one of the comm units. It had taken weeks of careful work, piecing things together with steady hands and pure stubborn determination. And it worked. Not perfectly. But it worked. The light appeared first. Bright and harsh, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Xylothian torches. Riley squinted against the glare as shadows moved across the stone floor. 3 of them. Maybe 4. It was hard to tell with the light in her eyes. Confirmation required, one of them said in that horrible grinding voice. The sacrifice remains. Riley took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment everything changed or everything ended. There was no middle ground anymore. She stood up on the dragon's head. Her legs shook as she climbed up the creature's snout, using the ridges in its scales as handholds. The dragon stayed absolutely still, helping her by tilting its head slightly, making the climb easier. When she reached the top of its massive skull, Riley stood up straight. She could feel the wind from the dragon's breathing, warm and alive against her back. The Xylothians below made sounds of confusion. One of them took a step forward. The human? Still alive. Impossible. Riley raised the comm unit she'd built. Her hands were steady now. Fear had burned away, replaced by something stronger. Something that felt like fire in her veins. My name is Riley Thompson, she said into the device. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, older than it should have been, harder. And I have something to say to every being in this fleet. She'd hacked into their broadcast system weeks ago, learning their frequencies, understanding their technology. The message was going out now to every ship, every holding cell, every corner of the Xylothian armada. You brought us here thinking we were weak, Riley continued, her voice carrying through the speakers on 1,000 ships. You brought us here thinking we would break. That we would bow. That we would die quietly in the dark. Below her, the Xylothians were moving, reaching for weapons, trying to process what was happening. But you were wrong about us, Riley said. And then she shouted the words with everything inside her. We are not what you think we are. We do not break. We do not surrender. We do not accept the chains you've put on us. The dragon lifted its head slowly, deliberately. Riley held tight to the ridges of its scales as the creature rose to its full height. The massive wings unfurled, those wings that Riley had spent weeks healing, nursing back to strength with bandages and careful hands and stubborn belief that this creature deserved to fly again. They were magnificent. Midnight blue scales catching the light and throwing it back in 1,000 directions. Strong. Powerful. Alive. The Xylothians below screamed something, but Riley didn't hear what. Because the dragon roared. The sound was beyond anything Riley had ever imagined. It wasn't just sound. It was a force. It was the voice of something ancient and powerful and done being silent. The roar shattered the viewport screens on the chamber walls. Alarms started screaming throughout the ship. The entire vessel shuddered like it was being torn apart from the inside. And it was spreading. On 1,000 other ships, beings that had been told they were weak were hearing Riley's message. They were hearing her voice. A human child. An 11-year-old girl. Standing on the head of a dragon. Refusing to break. In the slave quarters, the Centaurians, 8 armed beings that the Xylothians had deemed too stupid for anything but labor, rose up and overwhelmed their guards. In the medical bays, the Lumini, beings of pure bioluminescent energy that the Xylothians had captured because they refused to understand them, began to glow so brightly that they burned out every surveillance system on their ships. The Vrillian hive mind collective, suppressed and controlled for generations, suddenly felt each other again. The connection the Xylothians had severed came roaring back online, and thousands of minds speaking as one was a force that no technology could stop. The Xylothian Empire didn't fall to overwhelming firepower. It didn't fall to military strategy or superior numbers. It fell because a small human girl and an ancient dragon showed everyone that they didn't have to accept the chains that had been placed on them. It fell because Riley Thompson stood on a dragon's head in the darkness and said 4 words that changed the galaxy forever. We do not break. Within hours, the Xylothian fleet was in chaos. Ships were collapsing. The command structure was failing. The beings they had enslaved for millennia were taking control of their own fate. And in the heart of it all, Riley stood with her hand on the dragon's neck, watching the empire crumble. The dragon looked down at her with those ancient eyes and made that soft rumbling sound again. This time it sounded like hope. The escape ship was small and fast, nothing like the massive Xylothian vessels that had dominated the stars for so long. Riley sat in the pilot's seat, a position she'd learned to manage through sheer determination and a lot of trial and error, and watched the fleet disappear behind them. The dragon filled most of the cargo hold, its massive body curled up in the limited space, its wings folded carefully against its sides. They didn't know where they were going. Not exactly. Riley just knew they had to leave. Had to disappear into the vastness of space where the Xylothians couldn't find them. Where they could start over. The broadcast she'd sent had changed everything. Within hours, every enslaved species in the Xylothian Empire had risen up. The Centaurians had taken control of their ships. The Lumini had used their light to blind the surveillance systems. The Vrillians had coordinated a fleet-wide shutdown of the command centers. By the time the Xylothian leadership realized what was happening, it was too late. The empire they'd built on conquest and cruelty was crumbling like ancient stone. But Riley didn't stay to watch it burn. She couldn't. All she wanted was to get away, to find somewhere safe, to figure out what came next. The dragon's breathing was soft and steady in the hold behind her. Over the weeks of healing its wing, Riley had learned to recognize the different sounds the creature made. This one meant contentment. Or maybe just exhaustion. The dragon had been through so much, thousands of years of captivity, of pain, of loneliness. And now, finally, it was free. Where are we going? Riley asked, not really expecting an answer. But the dragon made that rumbling sound again, and suddenly Riley's mind was flooded with images. A planet. Green and blue with vast oceans and towering forests. A place where the dragon had been born before the Xylothians came. Before everything changed. Riley adjusted their course. The navigation computer calculated the distance. It would take months to get there. Maybe longer. But they had time now. They had something they'd never had before. They had a future. News of what had happened spread quickly through the galaxy. A human child. An 11-year-old girl who had sparked a revolution. Within weeks, Riley's name was known on every world, in every star system. The story grew with each telling. A brave girl who had faced down an empire and won. A child who had reminded the galaxy that size doesn't matter, that age doesn't matter, that one person with courage can change everything. Back on Earth, humanity's leaders watched the reports in stunned silence. For so long, they'd believed their species was insignificant. The galaxy was full of older civilizations, more advanced species, beings with technology and power that humans could never match. Earth had seemed small, fragile, almost irrelevant. But Riley had shown them something different. Messages started arriving from across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved by the Xylothians, now free and reaching out to humanity. They wanted to meet the girl who had saved them. They wanted to learn from her. They wanted to build something new together, an alliance of free beings, united not by conquest but by something stronger. By hope. By the belief that even the smallest among them could make a difference. Years passed. Riley grew from an 11-year-old survivor into a young woman with a mission. The first thing she did when they reached the dragon's home world was to establish a medical facility. It was crude at first, built from salvaged materials and determination. But it worked. She treated the dragon's remaining injuries, healing wounds that had lasted for centuries. And then she opened it to others. Beings from across the galaxy started arriving, seeking help from the human doctor who had changed their lives. Some of them were physically wounded like the dragon. Others carried emotional scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. Riley treated them all with the same careful hands and the same fierce determination that had kept her alive in that dark chasm. She became more than just a doctor. She became a symbol. Proof that compassion and determination could heal what violence and cruelty had broken. Proof that the smallest person could make the biggest difference. The dragon never left her side. It became her partner, her friend, her constant companion. Together they traveled from world to world, from star system to star system, helping beings that the galaxy had deemed expendable. Species that had been enslaved, exploited, forgotten. Riley gave them something that had been taken from them: hope, and dignity, and the knowledge that they mattered. The age of Xylothian tyranny had ended not with weapons, but with a child's refusal to break. With a dragon's choice to protect someone smaller and weaker than itself. With the revolutionary idea that all beings, no matter how small, no matter how young, no matter how insignificant they seemed, deserved to be free. Earth transformed into a beacon of hope for the galaxy. Humanity, once thought to be weak and primitive, became known as the species that inspired others. The species that united worlds. The species that believed in second chances and healing and the power of one person to change everything. And Riley? She never stopped being a doctor. She never stopped helping others. She never forgot what it felt like to be trapped in darkness, to be told she was worthless, to be sacrificed like she meant nothing. Because of that, she made sure no one else ever had to feel that way again. The dragon's roar that had shattered the Xylothian fleet became a legend, retold across 1,000 worlds, a symbol of liberation. But the real miracle wasn't the roar. It was what came after. It was the choice Riley made every single day to help others. It was the bond between a human girl and an ancient dragon that proved love and compassion could overcome any empire built on cruelty. The future that Riley had dreamed about in that dark chasm, a future where she could help people, where she could make a real difference, had come true. But it was bigger than she'd ever imagined. She hadn't just helped her colony escape. She hadn't just freed the enslaved beings of the galaxy. She had changed what it meant to be human. She had shown the universe that humanity's strength wasn't in weapons or technology or military power. It was in the ability to see suffering and refuse to accept it. To stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. To believe that even the smallest voice could echo across the stars. Riley Thompson, the 11-year-old girl who refused to break, had become the woman who helped heal a galaxy. And it had all started with a choice made by a dragon in the darkness. The choice to protect someone smaller than itself, to recognize a kindred spirit, to believe that together they could change everything. The age of Xylothian tyranny was over. The age of hope had begun. And